What we want to do is present and discuss what social analysts are telling us are the new trends of the tides that are changing in our societies based on what people are calling the information age, and see if what we're doing for our clients matches with the demands of societal changes. Generations change because societies change. They typically change because of technologies that come around and evolve around the livelihoods of people.
The basis of the presentation is like this. I think we all understand very well the symptoms of what's happening in society now and people that are growing up, whether you call them millennials or iGen or whatever. And so the way I picture it in my mind is that if you have a headache, and let's say that's the symptom, and you go to the pharmacist is going to give you something for the pain. Now you fixed your symptom. But I don't think we are pharmacists. We don't fix symptoms. We fix the causes. We're doctors, I guess, to follow the analogy. And so instead of talking about the symptoms of what's coming up in society these days, we want to look at the causes and then create strategies based on the causes and not on the symptoms. And of course, as we talk, we're going to see that the symptoms are there, but we want to go to the causes first.
Today we are going to talk about what our goal is, right, and why it's important to know what our goal is, because we want to know what we're shooting for, what are we measuring, what's the point, why are we all here, and why are we doing this. We want to know how we do it, because we want to know if our approaches are actually creating change or if they're being effective, and also if they're aligned with these dynamics, these underlying dynamics, or the root causes of some of the symptomology that we're seeing in today's people. And then finally, the question of why is this your goal and why is this your approach is important. These generational differences and the trends that we're seeing, if we're using the same approaches that we used for Generation X and that we used for baby boomers and that we used for people in the last century, and we're not updating and adjusting these approaches, then what are we doing, right? We're expecting Tylenol to cure cancer, or we're expecting some treatment to work for something that's not updated.
We've been interviewing millennials from different places around the world, and you definitely realize that they're all different. And so we do want to clarify that these tendencies apply more to people that are more attached to the technologies that have created the information age. And so the closer you are to, I guess, Silicon Valley, and in the virtual sense of it, the closer you're going to be to being affected by these tendencies. And the opposite, right? If you live in in rural Mongolia, you might not be affected by these as much. Anyways, decentralized power, self-programming, diffuse identities, agency disparity, comfort bias. Those are the 5 we're going to talk about. Power dynamics have changed. The internet has a lot to do with this. People are able to access information now in ways where they don't have to go through the authorities that hold the power to knowledge. But even beyond that, people are able to produce knowledge in ways that you couldn't produce before without being, in a sanctioned position to produce knowledge. And so what this has done is that the gatekeepers of knowledge no longer hold a particular power. Parents, the government, educational institutions, religious institutions, they don't hold the power of knowledge. The way that this affects people, it affects all of us, but it affects more people that are growing up, is that they don't see power in the same way that they used to. The power dynamics are not perceived in the same way. Because people feel like they can get around that. Peer networks are a big thing, and it's interesting. An example that fits with knowledge is that Wikipedia is now the most used encyclopedia in the world. And Wikipedia was not created by a team of experts. It was created by everybody. That's decentralized power. but you have Kickstarter that funds more projects than any other funding organization. You have Uber, and then you have some examples like the rise of terrorism, which is also a way of decentralizing power, right? People network outside the usual frames of power. But this affects the way people are growing up because they don't see power in the same way. And we're going to see it more as it trickles down into the other areas in how this sort of the anchor of power moving around makes a difference in people's psyche. We also, in part of this research that we're doing, we're asking our millennials their opinion on what's different growing up, or what's different about growing up in the world today. We ended up sticking with, because the data was so vast, we ended up sticking with just one conversation that I had with my students at the Bridge. And so this all comes from the same conversation, but we wanted to have their voice and their perception of things, and we've grouped them into these categories.
It used to be the parents had basically control over like what you watched on TV and what you like saw, because like maybe you'd go to a movie and you'd see previews, or you'd go out and see billboards. But like now with the internet, like if the kids are on the internet, the parents have no idea what they're doing. They have no idea what they're saying, they have no idea what they're learning. And there's like a huge number of factors.
If they choose to.
Well, yeah, but like, no, like just stuff that like gets thrown in your face, pop-ups, whatever you want to call it. Like, or they go into a game website and then it links to something else. Like, you never know. The internet is just like, it's a lot more nebulous than TV or a newspaper in terms of what a kid can be exposed to.
Self-programming. One of the characteristics of the information age, the age of complexity, is how quickly everything's changing. So if you look at evolution and the revolutions in human technology and the complexity of our societies, we've always become more complex, but it's happened more rapidly. As technology grows, it grows exponentially. And so the issue with self-programming is that if you compare the kinds of skills that you needed for example, people said you need to become skilled labor. And people are saying now that it is no good or not good enough to be skilled labor. You have to become self-programmable labor. And what this means is that you need to be able to program yourself and self-educate and innovate to keep up with the changes. And if you don't have installed the software, I guess, to reprogram yourself, then you're going to be consumed and relegated by the tidal wave of the changes. And they say that it's even worse than if you it's even worse to be kind of connected in the web than if you're not. And guess what I'm saying is that the person in rural Mongolia is going to be better off than those that are involved in the web of the technology of the internet but don't have the skills to keep up with it. Manuel Castells, who I really like as an author, it talks about self-programmable labor, and then he says that there's a new category called generic labor. And the risk with that is that generic labor is easily replaced by people in other countries now that the markets are globalized. So if all you do is execute, they might just take your job and give it to someone in India, and they do. And even worse, they take your job and give it to a machine. And so it's high risk to not be self-programmable. And so you begin to get some ideas as to where we're going with this in terms of the skills that we have to teach. Because if you teach just skills, then you might end up with someone that can end up just being generic labor. And so we have to find a way to get people to self-program.
For people's dream, if you're like an entrepreneur, is like, I want to create like a small company, and I want to build from the ground up to a certain point where I'm self-sufficient and creating a life for myself. Now the idea is like, I want to start up. I want to make Facebook. I want to have the next idea where it's one idea and then you benefit an infinite amount more off of that one idea. just because you were the lucky guy hitting the lottery.
So that's a young man in his perception of the fact that he's saying, people, right? He might be speaking of himself too, but he's saying people want to be that innovative person. People want to be that person that comes up with that new idea that's in the front of the tide. Because you can no longer just be the person that has a small company and just goes to work 8 to 5 for the rest of your life. It's not going to happen.
Diffuse identities. And this is the idea that identity development is no longer linear, and it's no longer rooted in our communities. So the identities that we developed in our families, in our hometowns, through religion, through political affiliation, these sort of linear black and white kind of identities don't exist anymore. Instead, the communities that younger generations are engaging in are completely individualized because they have this web and they have unlimited access to all kinds of peoples and cultures and languages and ideas, and because they're also obsessed with individualizing themselves and being unique and different. They've started to create their own avatars. They're self-selecting and cherry-picking what they want to add to their identity. And we see this on social media as well. So they in some ways, they're very liberated to create this unique human being who can be whoever he or she wants to be. And I'm not defined by my parents or my school or my religious institution down the street. I can be myself, which is wonderful, but it's also super overwhelming. So when you have all of these choices, how you choose. And at that age, when they're in the stage of cognitive development in which they're in, where things are still pretty concrete, they're just learning to manage abstractions and integrate all of those kinds of nuances together, identity development is really challenging. And so it takes longer, and this is something that Jeffrey Arnett talks about with emerging adulthood. One of the reasons why it's been extended, that individuation and identity development is just going to take a longer time because there's so much more to process in the world.
That with the advent of social media, with the internet, and the hyper-connectedness that you can experience basically anywhere in the world that has a reasonable amount of money, is that you can compare yourself to everyone on the planet and you feel so lost in what you want to do because everybody's already doing all these things that are 50 years ago, half the jobs that exist today don't exist or didn't exist. And for me, I'm thinking in 50 years there's going to be another incredible amount of jobs that I could not have possibly imagined or prepared myself for. And so I get stuck on, well, if I want to be a teacher, should I try to learn how to use Google Classrooms and use electronics to help my students, or should I be well, I should study the basics and just be able to apply that to everything? It's and that's a personal example, but I think it really applies to any other job in the world where with the advent of all these new technologies and the ability to compare yourself to everyone, you're this guy's better than me at this, so why should I even try? Or I've got nothing new to add, so why should I try to add something if I'm just going to be repeating the same thing all these 500 other people who are smarter, stronger, prettier than me are doing it? And I'm not going to get anywhere near enough money because there's all this competition. And that's the same thing with college. It's everybody wants to get a college degree because they want to get the job that'll get them the money to get them the things they want. But that's more and more people are realizing that people, not those people that want to go to college, are realizing that that's not a path to success, because if you don't have the money to go to college and you don't have the scholarships to go to college, then you've got the debt, but you don't end up getting the job because there's already too much competition. And it just creates this lovely spiral of comparison to other people and feeling bad about yourself due to things that are that were never available. The ability to compare yourself to someone in the middle of China, for instance, that wasn't a thing 20 years ago. Like, I couldn't go on Facebook and be like, wow, look at this 4-year-old who can play every song written by Beethoven with one hand on the piano. And just like, well, and that's like an example of an extreme, but like being able to compare yourself to everybody who can do the things that you like to do but better, it can be a way to look at like, I can improve this way, but it's also a lot more likely that you're going to be turned off from doing it because you're like, this guy's already done it better than I ever could.
You can hear in his voice how overwhelmed he is with not knowing which direction to go. Like, I can be someone now, but is that person going to be irrelevant 20 years from now? And so where do I even begin? How do I start choosing?
Agency disparity is in some ways a collection of the other tendencies. The issue with agency is that because identities are diffuse, because power is decentered, because you're supposed to self-program, there is a huge pull for, like Heather was saying, for you to be an individual, to make choices, to carve your own path, to call the shots. And yet, on the other hand, the amount or the influence that technology has in our lives is meant to take away our agency, right? When you go to the microwave and you just press a button and the food is done, your agency toward the food making is diminished by a lot. And I could go on and on and on with examples, but the point is that technology is meant to make our lives easier, right? And so what a lot of people, especially growing up in this time, are struggling with is that they're supposed to be agents of themselves, to drive themselves, to carve their own path, and their preparation to do that is much smaller. And technology has a big influence on that, but also because, once again, and we would love to talk about this a lot, and we don't have the time, but we all often talk about the issue with parenting and so on, but parents are also stripped from some of their power to say, you're going to struggle through this, right? Because they're not, the system doesn't allow them as much. And so the issue here is with agency disparity is that there's more expectation, more demand for young adults, and less preparation. An example of that that has to do with the paradox of choice that you may be familiar with, Short's book, is, for example, the common application. I think Common App is great because you just have to do less work. Technology just sends it out everywhere, and it helps. But what it doesn't help is to make the choice, and that's the hardest part, right? At the end of the day, having to send out your stuff everywhere doesn't really, it makes it seem like it's easier, but you have more choice because now you have to think about 2,000 places that you could go to because you have all those options, but it doesn't help at all. In fact, it puts more weight on the person having to make the choice. And that's where agency disparity is coming from.
That's a good example of casting a net, and people do that in social media too. You post a photo and just wait to see who responds. You apply to 200 schools and wait to see where you get in. So there's a lot less of that directed, intentional seeking out of opportunities or relationships or choices. And so you lose power in that. It's that same power is distributed and diluted.
And so automatically you're like, you have something that you should be doing, you have a limiting thing, which is I need to be going to college, and that's almost a given. I need, school it's given to us. It's all there's not many other choices, and so there's not much freedom in that. And so a lot of people have these expectations from when they were a kid, and you slowly lose a lot of them as you grow up, but, there's a lot of these expectations of infinite possibility, and then you get to the point where it's like a slap in the face, and it's like, there's way more struggles, there's way less possibilities, and it's daunting, and it's when you have such an intimate relationship with the dream, of like, I'm going to be living on Mars one day or whatever. It's like everything that is on Earth in this moment is like I have to clean my room every day. I might not have had to do that as a kid, or whatever chore or like part of life that is like was I was privileged enough to not have to do. Dealing with that is sort of, I don't know if this makes sense, but it's sort of a larger scale, like, I don't know, when it moves down a level or something like that. No, I mean, yes, but no, but more, it can have the opposite, not that effect.
Like a disappointing, like...
Yeah, it's sort of like, the world is a lie, sort of. It's like, or like, and you can't blame people because, like, no one told you a lie. It just made sense for you to believe it a certain way because it was logical, given the way it was presented.
The illusion.
Yeah, and so it's like, no one, like, in a poem I wrote, it was like, how could someone convince me that wisdom was something to run to? I liked being young. Everything is beautiful and amazing, but I grew up anyways. I guess I thought clarity was better. And it's like how could someone convince me that life is going to be magical? Even magic is a trick. It's like, but I believed it. And it was like that like led to a lot of negative behaviors, which led to a lot of problems, similar problems that a lot of people are having, which is sort of like it can leave you feeling really alone in the struggle because people get it at different times in different ways and don't publicize it.
So the fifth tendency that we're presenting today is comfort bias. And this is, kind of a larger category that includes physical and emotional safety, but also, can talk about comfort in a lot of areas such as economic comfort, and things like that. So this one comes from a perceived increase in danger. Even though statistics show that we're probably safer today than we've ever been before, there's a perception of higher risk and higher danger. This could come from just more education and knowledge and information about things like negative news stories, terrorism, rape, violence, all of these things that kids today are identifying as risks to their health and to their safety. So what has come from that perceived increase in danger is more protection. And we all know this. We all know parents are supervising more, they're scheduling more, they're buying all the protective gear, and you can get sued if you don't buy the protective gear. Parents don't want to, a lot of times they'll make parenting decisions based on what other people are going to say if they're protecting their kids enough. So, more protection means fewer opportunities to build resilience because kids are, being bubble wrapped a little bit from those experiences that, make you tougher, make you stronger, make things less scary for you. So about physical safety specifically, the other interesting thing about this is that over the past, with the invention of different technologies and advancements in medicine and things like this, we've been able to control physical safety more. So again, the gear, the medicine, the treatments, all of the accommodations that we make to our physical environment, the plugs, the plastic plugs so that your kids don't electrocute themselves, the yellow tape on the stairs so you don't have to watch where you're walking. All of these things have made us believe that it's easier to control physical safety, that we can reduce risk, we can manage risks, and therefore live in a safer environment and hold people accountable to that safety. Again, we can sue people if our coffee's too hot, if it's served too hot. So things like accidents are much harder to accept. Now, what's happened recently is this has also flowed over into emotional safety. There is a sense that we're entitled to not get hurt physically and emotionally. And on the flip side of that, we have a responsibility to not hurt others or to not offend others in an emotionally safe environment. There's a lot of surveys out with college students now talking about how they are holding universities responsible to create these safe spaces for them. So comedians who typically got a free hall pass to make inappropriate jokes and discuss some of these politically incorrect topics such as race and gender are no longer they're no longer choosing to do shows at universities. Universities are canceling appearances because they're afraid of what the students are going to protest or how they're going to react. And so what's happening? We're just not having these conversations because we value safety over getting into those difficult conversations and working through them. Again, we're bubble wrapping our emotions as well. That's created, quite a bit of anxiety in our students and in our young people, because specifically for that reason, they haven't fallen off their bike and skinned their knee. They haven't been offended and learned to deal with that discomfort and work through it and, retain friendships or have interesting debates. This creates a lot of contradictions. So, for example, we're expected to be politically correct, and yet we have freedom of speech. So where is that line drawn? What can we express freely without offending? Or what are we responsible to express in order so that someone else is not offended? Social media is another example of a lot of contradiction. People are certainly free to express what they're doing. They can sort of create their own image online, but the contradiction in that is that it's not authentic. And so while they have more opportunities to control how their image is presented, they have less authenticity in that actually matching who they really are, and that gap creates a lot of anxiety and a lot of pressure. And, Danny and I were talking the other day that this, sort of comparing this to Maslow's hierarchy, we've really raised the bar in what it means to be, to be safe. And, whereas we've gone from surviving to thriving as the expectation. So no longer are we satisfied with just getting through things or being outside of our comfort zone and working through something and being proud of ourselves for that. We expect to be comfortable. We expect to be safe. And so that has created this standard that we've set that really is not very realistic for everyone to achieve, and maybe shouldn't even be a standard that we set at all. There's a National Geographic article last week, and again, Costa Rica was one of the 3 countries highlighted on the cover as being one of the happiest peoples in the world. And if you look through some of their infographics, what they're showing is that financially they're on the lower range of those needs being met, their economic needs being met, and yet their positive emotion, their social connection, their sense of support and community is all much higher than other countries. So this is specific to American culture, what we're talking about right now, but it's certainly with the spread of connections and networks through technology, those expectations are spreading as well, and we see it in Costa Rica from as we live there, that those expectations for financial gain or economic security are starting to influence the Costa Rican sense of self and the Costa Rican sense of what standard they're supposed to be living up to or what they need to be happy.
Most of our grandparents, I'm pretty sure, would tell us that they went to school uphill both ways. Uphill going to school, uphill coming home from school, which is like the kind of lifestyle is like they didn't really have transportation to get to school. They had to figure it out, and if it was difficult, they still went. And that generation grew up saying, I want to make sure my kids get to school. I want to make sure they can get there quickly without having to walk. And then that taught our parents that they would be able to get rides to school. They would be able to get to school better. They were given more stuff. School was a little bit more expensive than it was for our grandparents, but our grandparents would be well off enough to at least get our parents through high school. And then our parents' generation, most of them would have to either do loans or pay for college themselves. And when you pay for college yourself and you're also thinking about your future family, I've heard a lot of people say, I want to make sure my kids never have to pay for anything. And I want to make sure my kids have everything that they need, be it like school, college, a car, whatever. So our parents have grown up thinking that they want to give us everything to make sure we don't have to do the struggles that they had, which is the same for every generation. The parents don't want the kids to go through the same struggles, and it builds more struggles every generation.
So we're going to transition now. We're going to propose something. We're going to say, okay, well, then what? We're going to say a what or a how.
So what could we be doing to help our young people ask themselves these questions and be aware of Big Brother efforts to market to them and manipulate them and control them? Because we see the symptoms already. We see how they are interacting with their worlds and their social networks and creating their identities. So we're going to go through the 5 areas and just propose a 21st century skill. I'm not speaking about 21st century skills in a strictly academic or educational setting, but in general based on this age of complexity paradigm that we're talking about. For decentralized power, we're looking at this sort of network, this horizontal network. So what we think students need to learn, or young people need to learn, is proactive purposefulness. So this kind of answers your question about how they're being manipulated or sort of canaled into specific information or networks. So what does that mean? Purposefulness. They need to have a purpose and use intention. So they need to be aware and mindful about where they're going and why they're going there. And secondly, they need to be proactive, because a lot of what we're seeing in the younger generations is this passivity of it will come to me. Again, that quick fix, that, if I wait for it, it'll come. And so this is sort of a self-correcting skill that we think we need to be really intentional about integrating into the work that we do with youth. For the comfort bias, it's pretty simple. It's resilience. We know that the result of being too protected or too bubble wrapped is a lack of resilience and getting through these struggles. We would add one little piece to that definition, which is accountability. And when we say accountability, we mean another thing that we've seen a lot in youth is this difficulty admitting mistakes. And we think that this comes from social media. This comes from this idea that I have to be perfect. And when we were interviewing them, so many of them said, like, it would be humiliating or embarrassing if something got on social media about me. And so there's this fear of admitting that I'm not perfect, and a fear of saying, like, oh, well, life's messy. I'll get through it. I'll learn from it, because so much of it's online now and it's permanent and everybody sees it. And you can't just walk away from it and say, oof, I hope he doesn't tell anybody I just said that because that was really dumb. So resilience. Open collaboration, and this isn't obvious, so I'm going to explain it a little bit. With the ability to individualize and self-select your identity also comes quite a bit of rigidity, because you pick who you want to be and you define that and then you stick to it. And again, a lot of youth today have this idea of, well, I'm going to believe what I'm going to believe, you believe what you want to believe, and as long as we don't disrespect each other, everything should be fine. And it's a very black and white, concrete way of approaching relationships and collaboration that we all know won't work, but that they don't know that yet. And in the academic realm, the 21st century skills organizations that have been working on these for the last 20 years are saying that this is going to be one of the most important skills that kids are going to have because of this network. Because they do need to collaborate with people across disciplines, of different languages in a global world. Having curiosity for other people, what they think, what their perspective is, being able to communicate, which is another thing. So many of our students will just say, like, no, I'm not interested in talking about that. And it's like, what do you mean? Well, I'm just going to believe what I'm going to believe, and he can believe what he's going to believe, and it's like, all right. So there's no debate, there's no conversation, there's no negotiation. And I didn't mention reciprocity, but that's the last piece of open collaboration. Curiosity, communication, and reciprocity. Self-programming. So for these kids who need to learn to update their own software to adapt to changes and fix bugs, problem finding and problem solving creativity. So not only do they need to know how to solve problems based on the 1, 2, 3 step method that we taught them from our education, they need to learn how to identify problems in a network and then come up with creative ways to solve them, to be innovative in solving them. And we added problem finding after this because of some of the reasons that you guys brought up in your questions, which is if they're not aware of how they're being marketed to or manipulated, they're never going to know that there is a problem. They're never going to ask themselves these questions. The last area is agency disparity, which is our skill that we want to focus on is self-governance. Self-governance brings up the idea of executive functioning, right? Being your own governor, your own CEO, being able to set goals, break them down, meet them, change route when you need to if something's not going well. But what we want to add to the definition, the traditional definition of executive functioning, is empowerment. Because this really is to develop agency and ownership of your process. So it's not just about this is the goal that my parents want me to reach and I know how to reach it, but this is the goal that I want to reach and this is how I reach it. Or in my communities or in my collaborations with other people, this is where we're going and I know how to govern myself to get there.
So what do you do with that? You take these props, which is the acronym of these skills, and what are they supposed to do? They're supposed to propel you toward something we have termed the self-generating function. Self-generating function is the ability to generate problem solving from within, to generate the energy that is required for you to grow and to problem solve. Perhaps controversial, but this concept for us stands in opposition to the idea of independence. And I know that a lot of what we're doing in our programs is saying, I'm going to prepare you for independence. But we think that preparing people for independence is a wrong thing to do. And maybe it's just because of the concept, but nothing in this universe is independent. And if you make people think that they're going to be independent, then they're going to make some mistakes because you have to stay connected to resources and systems of support. And it's happened to me where I've had a couple of cases of students who go off to college and then they're calling me and they're like, I'm messing up, this is terrible. I'm like, well, then we talk about tutoring and keeping up with your meds and all these kinds of things. They're like, yeah, but I want to be independent. I'm like, what's a stupid idea? Like, why do you want to be independent? Nobody's independent. And the same thing. It's like you may say, well, then the goal is interdependence. But then we'd say, well, that's obvious. Like everybody's interdependent. So what's the point here? The point isn't dependence or independence. The point is, I have a 10-month-old baby at home, and he doesn't self-generate problem solving, right? All his problems are solved by mom and dad. Mom, for the most part, I'm really not solving any problems for him right now. But as you grow up, you're able to generate the problem solving yourself. I think of, if you have a car and you need to get it fixed, the mechanic doesn't call you and say, hey, any problems with the car today? Can I pick it up? Something going on? You have to take the car to the shop yourself. You're not supposed to know how to fix the car. You go to the doctor, the lawyer, the accountant, all these kinds of people, but it can't be someone else monitoring your problem solving. You have to have internal resources to seek out solutions on the outside or inside. So the self-generating functions for us, a very important point here that also has to do with what we believe is a demand for people in the age of complexity. And what the self-generating function leads to is what we call integrative growth. And I'll go through that quickly because it's a lot to talk about. And I think if we stay with self-generating function, I think we're good enough. But the idea of integrative growth is that when you activate self-generating function, meaning, and we use the word activate on purpose because it's not something that you reach, it's not a skill that now you possess, it's something that you have to activate, meaning that sometimes we are exercising the props and sometimes we're not. And when we're not growing, and that's just what's happening. But the more we can activate those skills, the more we're going to grow. And the ideal way in which you grow, if you're doing this, is in a way that's transferable, meaning that you can extrapolate that learning into other situations. It's incorporative, so it's not only something you do, but it becomes something that you are. And that it's systemic, meaning that when you grow and when you learn, your surroundings learn and grow as well. So that's the idea of integrative growth.
So process-based scaffolding is basically how we determine what kind of structure and support a person needs at a particular point in time. So scaffolding itself is the structuring of those experiences. What is our objective? What is our goal? We're going to climb this mountain. Great. Okay. And then the second piece of that scaffolding is support. Just like a construction worker would have a harness on as he's standing up on the scaffolding, we also want to make sure that our young people have the level of support and safety nets that they need in order to climb that mountain. And the other half of this phrase, which is process-based, means that we're basically going to meet them where they are in the process, which is the basics of individualization, right? So we're going to try to figure out where they are in this learning process, how ready are they to climb a mountain, and we gotta keep going as well. So where are they right now? How do we get them to the next point in the process? Again, what kinds of experiences and support do we need to provide to get them to that next level of being prepared to climb the mountain or getting to the next elevation level of the mountain itself? And all of this is very aligned with Lev Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. So basically, what we're shooting for as facilitators is to hit that sweet spot of what our students can do with support. So we don't want to just not challenge them and give them tasks that they already know how to do and that are easy for them and are boring because they're not challenging, they're not learning anything. And yet we don't want to give them challenges that are in this red zone where they're not prepared, and therefore it's too overwhelming. They don't have the skill set to achieve it, and therefore they just shut down or sit down or give up or get overwhelmed. So we don't want somebody running up the mountain and being bored by it. We don't want someone sitting down at mile 2 of a 20-mile hike and just saying, I'm not going, I'm staying here, digging my heels in, I'm done. And that's the idea of process-based scaffolding. It's that nuanced and subtle process of figuring out where someone is in the process and what kind of structured experiences and supports do they need to get to that next level, to get to that next mile.
So there's a how to the how. If we think of process-based scaffolding in the idea of taking someone on a hike, for example, we wouldn't take them to hike to the corner store, right? Because that's not going to challenge them. But we're not going to take them to Mount Everest all of a sudden because that's not going to teach them much. We want to scaffold it and provide the support, but also make it so that it's challenging enough. Okay? And for you to know what challenging enough is, because you can't just know that and say, oh, in my plan, John's, level is going to be like this, or the group's level is going to be like this. You have to understand the person or the group or the community and know where they're at. And you do that by using 2 skills that go together, work in tandem. One of them being empathic connection, and the other one being collaborative empowerment. What is empathy? What is the hardest thing about, or the biggest obstacle about empathy? The way I think about that is people say that empathy is putting yourself in other people's shoes. And that's true. That's kind of a layman's definition of empathy. And I think the issue that we stumble upon a lot of times is that we don't take our own shoes off. And so we put other people's shoes on with our own shoes on, and so it gets mixed up. We're in the mix. Our own biases are in the mix. Our own prejudices are in the mix. So there's a lot of ego, I guess, to a large or small degree, that clouds empathy. But the important piece about empathy here is that you can understand where the person is at. So if we're beginning this hike and we've decided that we're going to do this, then we have to understand, what does a person think about this hike? How do they feel about the hike? Are there past experiences that have to do with hikes? The point here is that you have to understand the way in which that person interprets what's going on. So if the person says, I'm fearful, you don't just say, oh yeah, fear, I know all about that. Well, how does that person understand fear? It's not fear in general, it's not my fear, it's the fear of that person. So we have to understand that in order to know how we're going to scaffold the experience and at what pace we're going to go through the experience, and maybe what the experience is going to be all about. Then collaborative empowerment is huge for the self-generating function, the props, and all these things that we've been talking about. If we're going to go on this hike, taking this person up the hill is no good for learning in a lot of ways. This person has to be involved in choosing the route. They have to be involved in choosing the gear or understanding what the gear is all about. Maybe we want to choose certain routes and they might fail. But the person's understanding that, how the process of going up a mountain works, because we don't want them to just get up to the mountain and be like, hey, celebration, we got to the top of the mountain. We want them to take themselves to other mountains. And if we're not going to teach them how you do that, then the learning is stunted in some way. We're only doing some learning, we're not doing all the learning. And so collaborative empowerment is about inviting people into the process so that they can understand what's behind the process. Certainly, in the spirit of scaffolding, you don't want to put people in dangerous situations. You don't want to put them in charge of things where they're going to feel defeated. But that's the trick of being a good facilitator, is that people can come to understand the process of what they're trying to do in a way that helps them learn the how. I think of it sometimes as, teaching someone to drive and then just driving. And then you're like, oh, this is how you do it. And then you're like, now you drive. Well, I should have been driving. That's how I'm going to learn how to drive, is by driving. And so that's what collaborative empowerment is all about. This actually comes from theories of sustainable development. This has nothing to do with psychology, but we believe is really useful and important. So our conclusion is the following. Our societies as systems have become interconnected enough that the points of touch have grown exponentially, providing a vitality to the entire system that can no longer be explained through linearity. It's simpler to explain it through linearity, but there comes a point when it no longer works, and our societies have reached that point. So we are urged to attend to the system, focus on process, adapt to emergence, and self-organize. The bottom line is, this is our bottom line, is that in the age of complexity, people cannot behave in linear ways, learn in linear ways, and we cannot treat them, teach them, heal them in linear ways. They have to mirror the times, becoming complex themselves, thus adopting characteristics that are true to complex systems. We must avoid simplistic, linear, and simple processes to our practices. We cannot settle with just outcomes. Our clients have to understand process. We cannot settle with tools. They have to become tool makers. We cannot settle with symptom reduction. We have to include self-generation. In fact, it may be recommended to take people out of their comfort zone, which I think we all do, more toward chaos than stability, as with the right support, they can leap to higher levels of existence and order. Tendencies we talked about, we've drawn from other scientists and authors. The supportive immersion approach is our own recipe.
And everybody, this applies to anything. So this can apply if you're an ed consultant, it applies to the clients you work with. If you're a program director, therapist, teacher, if you're a manager of staff, it can really apply to any person or group that you're working with.
I find that it is a very enticing invitation to ask people to be empowered. I think that young adults really long to be empowered, and if we're not afraid of giving them a little bit of that, that's as much motivation as they need, because they long to have something to contribute. They long to, stand on their own 2 feet, and they may mask that with indifference. But I think when you invite them to be empowered, they're willing to take the chance if you'll support them to not, fail miserably.
I'm curious, as you're empowering the young adult, what about the higher family system, the parents who struggle with the power, the collaboration, and the agency that the young adults bring? Like, how are you addressing that?
Totally. That is super important, and it is important that parents are taught to do the same. I tell them, this is the analogy I tell them. When your little boy was learning to walk, if he turned around and saw you freaking out, would he be freaking out? Yes. So now that your boy is becoming an adult and he's taking those steps toward independence, you have to show confidence that they can do it. A little bit on the concrete. So we have moved from kind of separate programs to the Supportive Immersion Institute, and the Supportive Immersion Institute shares a philosophy and shares training, and these are the programs and these are all our programs, but there are the programs that we are where we're utilizing supportive immersion. And so we're using this as a way to facilitate the growth process. And by the way, in this model, we created it with the intention that it works for different entities. We've just talked today about a person, but you can use props for a community. You can use self-generation for a group of people, because, and we do a lot of projects with communities in rural Costa Rica, in South Africa, and we go empower those communities. And the process that our students are doing involves empathetic connection, collaborative empowerment with the rural youth of Costa Rica, and a scaffolded process for them to do that. Our trips to South Africa involve that process as well, and so we're using it all across, and so it's the presentation today is focused on individuals, but it is not the intention that this focuses only on individuals. We wanted to work for a community level as well. Really appreciate the engagement. Like I said, we would love, and I guess let's not be regretful. We have the rest of the time here to continue talking. Please reach out to us. Go on supportiveimmersion.com, and let's keep the conversation going. That's the idea of sharing this with you guys. So thank you so much.